Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Extension. The ancient thinkers talked about a balanced growth of population so that certain level of quality of life can be maintained. The two great works of Plato, namely the Republic, ca 370 to 380 BC, and the Laws, cs 340 BC, has fixed the size of the citizens at 5040 for the city-state while keeping Athens and Sparta in his mind. This number of citizens is perhaps equivalent to a total population of 10 to 12 times that number when women, children and slaves are considered. The ideal number was a concern for Aristotle, another great thinker. He has opined that neither a small nor very large number is desirable for a good state. In a similar manner, Chinese philosopher Confucius was indicative towards optimum population size, where he said that very thin population is not desirable for agricultural growth, and at the same time, if there is technological stagnation in agriculture, high population growth will lead to reduced revenue collection. Indian political philosopher Chanakya in his Arthashastra mentioned that ideal size of the population in a village should be between 100 and 500 agricultural families for every 1 to 2 square mile area, depending upon the agricultural and mining potential of the region. Thus, the thinkers were extremely concerned about the size of the population and its growth, as it is highly related with security of the nation and good living of its inhabitants. Population growth remained a point of interest not only to the academicians but also to the policy makers. Every growth of population, both positive and negative, is a result of socio-economic processes, and at the same time they are often reasons for that. The population growth along with its pace provides idea about the resource requirement for good living and the pressure on planet Earth. At contemporary time, population size and density is a concern for environment and development. An unprecedented growth of population has created several problems, namely, weakening of resource base, exploiting the vulnerable ecosystem for sustenance, rising inequality. While talking about distribution and growth of population, mostly overall pattern is introduced as share of male and female in the population is more or less equal in the world. The study of population is the study of human society, and thus, areal focus is important. Any study of population begins with its distribution and growth. History. We all have a curiosity to know the world population distribution and how quickly or in what pace we have been grown in numbers in order to reach in today's size. The present distribution, density and growth of the population are extremely uneven in the world, and every geographical area have their own trajectory to reach in today's position. After reading this unit, learner will be able to I. Explain patterns of population growth. E. Discuss components of population growth. E. Describe various trends of population across the globe. IV. Narrate factors of population growth in the different countries. 4.2 Components of population growth. Globally, birth and death determine the population growth. Whenever there is decline in mortality, assuming fertility remains constant, the high population growth is inevitable. Similarly, when fertility is extremely low, then decline in population growth rate is observed. However, at local or smaller geographical regions, immigration and emigration also plays important role in determining population size. 4.2.1 Data source. Even when the scholars were concerned about the implication of the size of the population, counting population was not regular until recently across the globe. However, there are several estimates available for the global population trend before the initiation of census in major part of the globe. Population census of the countries is the major data source in current time to study population trends. However, United Nations publishes global population prospects on a regular basis to provide current trend and future projection of the population. The Paleolithic period, roughly 2.5 million years ago to 10,000 BC, is also known as Old Stone Age. People were hunter-gatherers. The Neolithic period, or New Stone Age, began around 12,000 years ago and experienced several revolutions, namely domestication of plants and animals and change from hunter-gatherer to settlement-based lifestyle. The Bronze Age was lasting approximately from 3300 BC to 1200 BC. As the name suggests, that it is characterized by the use of metal, namely bronze, and early features of urban civilization observed in this era. 4.3 Growth of population of the world. It is estimated that world has reached to 1 billion somewhere around 1800. But it took hundreds and thousands of years for the Homo sapiens to reach to 1 billion. The Earth has 1 million inhabitants in Paleolithic era, reached to 10 million. In Neolithic age and 100 million Bronze Age, the Earth was extremely sparsely populated, as the figures suggest. The hunter-gatherer required large amount of forest to collect food for them. Poor technology kept the Earth's carrying capacity low. With little improvement in technology as observed from domestication of plants and animals, the carrying capacity increased, so the population size. 4.3.1 Period of population growth. Period of population growth can be discussed by dividing into 4 major stages as follows. 1. Population prior to 10,000 BC. 2. Population between 10,000 BC and 1650 AD. 3. Population between 1650 and 1820. 4. Population since 1820. 1. Population prior to 10,000 BC. Before discussing the modern rise of the population, let us look at the population growth in the ancient years. The major determinants of global population growth are birth and death dynamics. World population prior to 10,000 BC experienced both high birth and death rate. This was the stage when humans were hunter and gatherers and used to live in caves, tree branches and under canopy cover. The first cultural revolution occurred in this period when they learned to lit fire. However, technology of food production and shelter was still not known, and as a result of that, survival struggle was extremely high. Estimated life expectancy was not more than 10 years. An estimated area of only about 20 million of square miles of the earth was used by the food gatherers and hunters. The scholars are divided in their opinion on the reason for the rise in population. In 18th century, a group of scholars believed that it was improvement in medical technology and decline in mortality rate, whereas there are another set of scholars who believe that there was little increase in fertility also happened. 2. Population between 10,000 BC and 1650 AD, Neolithic period experienced next cultural revolution when human learned to domesticate plants and animals. The obvious associated feature with domestication of plant, less movement for food, leaning the technique of making shelters, and thus developed the less mobile living arrangements. That was the initiation of village life. Domestication of plants and animals has helped to improve food diversity and food security. Better shelters protected humans from the vagaries of nature, and thus longevity improved. The scholars are divided in their opinion on the reason for the rise in population in 18th century. A group of scholars believe that it was improvement in medical technology and decline in mortality rate, whereas there are another set of scholars who believe that there was little increase in fertility also happened. 3. Population between 1650 and 1820. This is a period of continuous improvement, mostly in agriculture and animal husbandry. Mechanization significantly affected agriculture, trade and economy. Food diversity increased substantially through local production and trade. Food security improved further, and as a result mortality declined further and life expectancy increased. Moreover, during 18th century, there was massive expansion of health infrastructure, namely hospitals and dispensaries, changes in medical education, improvement in anatomy and surgery, and introduction of inoculation against smallpox. England took a lead role in spreading medical education across its own countries and its colonies. Homeopathy, another branch of medical treatment, was also introduced during this time. Despite several achievements, population growth rate was around 0.3% per annum, as there were several mortality peaks due to epidemic, famine, and wars. Though there were definite signs of positive growth, it was yet significantly low. 4. Population since 1820. This is assumed to be the last cultural revolution when Industrial Revolution took place. Initiation of Industrial Revolution is traced back in the improvement of agricultural technology. Food production and preservation technology improved substantially. Along with that, invention of steam engine, introduction of railway, improvement of road transport and infrastructure has made food transport much easier, and thus food basket added more variety of food. Further, spread of industries lead to massive rural to urban migration and lead to increased level of congestion and lack of health and hygiene. Between 1900 to 1921 was the era when few eruptions of fatal episodes of influenza and plague took heavy toll. The year 1921 is termed as a year of great demographic divide in India, when the country experienced a great loss of population and negative growth rate. However, the rich countries experienced a steady increase and higher growth rate in population during this period due to additional measures related to health and hygiene were taken to contain the spread of contagious disease. However, the long-lasting threat from smallpox, typhoid, yellow fever and scarlet fever quite dominantly continued even in this century. Moreover, cholera emerged as an epidemic threat and spread worldwide, resulting in 6 pandemics in the 19th century. Picture 1. Several innovations related to life-saving treatment and medicine changed the course of life. Development of microbiology and immunology has deep impact in public health. The second stage of demographic transition was initiated, though at a slower pace, in several European countries. But several developing countries were devoid of any massive development and spread of medical technology. But they were experiencing unprecedented international movements through the spread of international trade by their colonial masters. This mobility helped spreading the contagious diseases across globe. The highly fatal flu of 1918 engulfed several countries. The picture 1 depicts how quarantine was practiced to contain the contagious disease and how telephone use was encouraged to remain connected. Picture 2. Picture 4.2. An advertisement for using telephone while in quarantine in 1918. Look at the screen. Between 1921 and 1950 was also eventful in the growth history of global population. During this tenure, world experienced Second World War, following which several countries attained independence from the colonial power. Meanwhile, the world experienced economic downturn between 1929 and 1939, which has historically been known as the Great Depression of 30s. So far, that was the longest economic depression, which was marked with uncertainties. Several young couples postponed their marriage and childbirth during this uncertain times. Followed by the Great Depression, there was baby boom, and as the name suggests, there was a large supply of babies when people massively took part in family building when economy revived. This was essentially a phenomenon experienced by the Western world. Similarly, in late 40s, India got independence after a prolonged bloodshedding independence war against the Britishers. There was largest number of forced political migrants in human history happened due to partition of India. The uncertainties that were looming over was over following that the sovereignty was acquired by a major part of the poor Asian, African and Latin American countries. The developing countries started getting the benefit of life-saving drugs and medical technology, and mortality declined. The developed countries took much longer time to control over mortality, but for developing countries it happened over much shorter duration of time due to supply of life-saving drugs and technology from the developed countries. Thus, they experienced higher birth rate, declining mortality rate and high population growth rate. 4.3.2 How we have become 8 billion? The growth, as it appears from the above, was not even and smooth for the globe. The estimated population of 1750 was only 750 million when the modern rise of population started, and only in 1830 global population reached to 1 billion mark. Once the European countries started observing high population growth, awareness on large number of infant deaths drawn the attention of the scientists and policy makers. Industrial revolution was marked by poor health condition of the labours in the urban areas of England. As a result, several industrial towns initially observed increased mortality, which raised enormous health concerns. A large number of hospitals were built in private initiative and public health initiatives were taken. Health and hygiene in prison and mental asylums drawn special attention. Public health and hygiene initiative resulted into decline in mortality with continued high fertility. The population has grown in an unprecedented faster rate and reached to 2 billion in 1930, 3 billion in 1960, 4 billion in 1975, 5 billion in 1987, 6 billion in 1999, 7 billion in 2010, 8 billion in 2022. The globe is expected to grow further, and population projections suggest that it may show a sign of decline after it reaches 10.4 million, figure 1. Even after decline in fertility rate, population continues to grow because of its youthful age structure. The growth momentum is embedded in the youthful age structure, which is a result of past high fertility. Growth shows a decline only when this young cohort passes their reproductive span. This is also termed as population momentum, as it is seen that it took several thousand years by the world population to reach 1 billion mark, but after that the growth was quite fast. It took only 80 years to add 1 more million, 100 years to 1 more million, so on and so forth. The time of doubling was shortening, as to reach from 1 to 2 billion the world took 100 years, and to reach 4 billion mark it took only 45 years. However, doubling time has shown a sign of increase, as it took 47 years to reach 8 billion mark with a slower pace of population growth. Table 4.1. Table 4.1. Time taken to add each million. Year population in years taken to add. Million a billion. 1750, 750. 1830, 1080. 1930, 2100. 1960, 3030. 1975, 4015. 1987, 5012. 1999, 6012. 2010, 7011. 2022, 8012. 2037, 9015. 2058, 100021. 4.4 Regional variation in population growth. There is wide range of variation in population growth, and when seen historically, it brings out some amazing facts to us. The following section deals with regional variation in population distribution and growth. 4.4.1 Rich versus poor countries. Bawal in his article has captured the extreme regional variation in population growth. He has observed that in the year 1900, Belgium and the Philippines both had around 7 million people. But by the year 2000, the population of Belgium had become 10 million as against 76 million people for Philippines. The unequal pattern of growth had remained a concern, and a strong voice against the poor countries was echoed from the rich countries. The pattern as depicted in the table 4.2 shows how the share of global population has shifted towards the poor countries. Table 4.2. World population in rich and poor countries, 1900 to 2010. Look at the screen. Once it is put in the graph, the visual shows, figure 4.2, the reversal of trend is revealed more clearly. Currently 82% of the global population is from the poor countries as against 18% from the rich. Over several decades the population growth rate of the rich countries remained less than 1%. But the growth rate of the poor countries still remained well above 1%, which indicates further future growth potential. 4.4.2 Distribution of population by continents. There are 7 continents, figure 4.3, in the world, and population distribution in them is essential to know as they are extremely unequal in population size. Almost 60% of the global population reside in Asia, 4.6 billion in 2020. It is the largest continent in the earth. 2 mostly populated countries, namely China and India, are part of this continent. Out of 4.6 billion, 2.8 billion, i.e. around 61% of the Asian population and about 36% of global population is belonging to these 2 countries. Only 4 countries, namely China, India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, contain 45% of the global population. In 2020, Asia's growth rate was 0.83% per annum. Western Asia is the fastest growing area, whereas the Eastern Asia has lowest growth rate. Easternmost country Japan is experiencing negative growth rate in recent times, and this sub-region is projected to have negative growth rate until the year 2050. The population growth rate 2.53% was the peak in the continent reached in 1968. The major reason for current population growth is declining fertility, low mortality with increasing longevity, and emigration from the major part of the continent. Africa is the second largest continent in the earth. The continent of Africa has 58 recognized sovereign states and countries and territories. The estimated population of Africa was 1.2 billion in 2016 and grown to 1.3 billion in 2020. The continent contributes 17% of the global population. The population growth of the continent is well above 2% per annum, though the growth rate has observed some decline. However, the continental growth masks regional variation in the population growth. According to UN, half of global population growth between 2022 till 2050 will be contributed by 4 African countries, namely Nigeria, Congo, Ethiopia and Tanzania. Africa as a continent still has high fertility, declining mortality and emigration. Those are shaping the population growth. Third largest continent in terms of population size is Europe, and it contributes around 10% of the global population. The available information on population counting majorly captured the growth history of Europe only. Mid-50s onwards, Europe has registered less than 1% growth rate. Alarmingly, in the year 2000, continent as a whole experienced negative growth rate, which it has revived further but still considered to be very low. The continent also shows variation in their growth pattern, where southern and eastern European countries have shown negative population growth during past several years. Europe is experiencing very low fertility and mortality rate, and thus, longevity is high. The continent also receives immigrants Fourth in the row is North America that accounts for around 7.6% of the global population. The continent has 41 countries and territories. Among them major countries are USA, Mexico and Canada. However, USA and Mexico alone contain more than 77% of the total population of the continent. Since the late 50s till date, the growth rate hovers around 1.5 to 0.5% per annum. The population growth pattern of USA historically has spikes and dips as a major part of the trend is contributed by immigration. Thus, recently released census data of 2022 observed near zero growth followed by COVID-19 pandemic when deaths were high. Immigration was low. Moreover, economic depression followed by Ukraine-Russia war has put a block for immigration. Fifth and last major continent is South America that contributes 5.5% of global population. This is a small continent with 14 countries only. Majority of the countries are small in population size. In this, little less than 50% of the population live in Brazil. Entire 60s and 70s have observed much higher than 2% growth rate per annum for the continent. However, there was a steady decline in growth rate during 80s and 90s, and current growth rate is lower than 1% per annum. Major part of the continent is tropical and western part is dominated by Andes mountain range. Eastern part has ridge which made the continent geographically less compatible. The last in the series is Oceania, as Antarctica has zero population living there. Oceania has 23 countries but majority has very less population. Australia alone accounts for 59% of the population of this continent, whereas 91% of the population is contributed by three countries, namely Australia, Papua New Guinea and New Zealand. Australia is majorly experiencing low growth rate due to low birth and death rate. The country encourages immigration as it is very low density country. 4.5 population density. The population distribution is not only measured through the size indicator, but also by using density indicator. Population density is measured as persons per unit of area. The pattern of distribution is less known until and unless population density is considered. For discussion, the density map reveals somewhat different picture where other than Asian countries, Europe appeared to be highly densely populated, though China and India occupy the first and second position in terms of total population size. Population density of these two countries is not the highest in the world. Among the most densely populated area appears some of the small territories. Macau, Monaco, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Gibraltar are the 5 most densely populated areas of the world. Among the major countries, Bangladesh is the most densely populated country in the world with a density of 1328 persons per square kilometer in 2022, though it ranks 8th in terms of population size. This density is nearly 3 times higher than the neighboring country India. Interestingly, 5th densely populated country is Netherlands. 523 persons per kilometer, that lies in Europe, that is grappling with very low population growth. The lowest density country is Greenland, which has less than 1 person per square kilometer. A major part of Africa, barring sub-Saharan part, is highly dense. Among the continents, Oceania is least densely populated. Mongolia, Namibia, Australia, and Iceland are among the lowest density countries, which has less than 10 persons per square kilometer in 2022. Figure 5, 4.6 Implication of uneven population growth. Differential population growth has differential implication for the countries and the continents. Natural growth of population, which is the result of differences in birth and death, also modifies the age structure of the population. Some scholars argue that the age structure is more important consideration for any country than its size of the population. It shows that high birth rate implies for young age structure, thereby having more young people than the older. Similarly, low death rate and higher longevity leads to accumulation of older population than that of younger population. Median age is an indicator of age structure of the population. Median value divides the entire distribution into 2 equal parts, half above that value and half below that. Higher median value indicates older age structure and lower median value indicates younger age structure. Thus, major populated continents are majorly characterized as follows: young Asia and South America, younger Africa, older Europe and America. As the figure 6 shows, Africa is much younger than rest of the world, whereas Asia, Oceania and South America are in relatively similar age distribution. The median age is an effective indicator of understanding the process of aging and balancing working age population. The 5 most aged countries measured in terms of median Age are Japan, 48.6 years, Germany, 47.8 years, Italy, 46.5 years, Greece, 45.3 years, Slovenia, 44.9 years. Referring to our section on components of population growth, it is worth mentioning here that the countries facing aging problem often lack sufficient labor force to run a competitive economy and thus opt for a lenient immigration policy. On the other hand, the young countries have plenty of supply of manpower. They are the emigrating countries. Increased international movement is taking care of natural growth imbalance between the countries. 4.7 Future population trends. The United Nations regularly undertake the task of projecting population. All the projections are based on certain assumptions and thus may actually vary in reality. However, they do provide some insight about future action to be taken. According to the recent most projections by the United Nations suggest that population will reach to 8.5 billion in 2030, 9.7 billion in 2050 and 10.4 billion in 2100. India's population may have already overtaken China's, estimates show. World News, updated on January 18, 2023 08:51 AM IST. India population. Although India's population growth has slowed, World Population Review said that it expected the number to continue to rise until at least 2050. Hindustan Times, an expected decline is estimated in the global population size only after that. In 2019 the life expectancy was 72.8 years, which is projected to reach at 77.2 years in 2050. This increasing longevity is the direct result of improvement in mortality. Since the fertility in some regions of the globe is still remain high, the decline in mortality results in population growth. Moreover, growth momentum plays important role in global population growth in recent times. The projection of the UN observed that 2/3 of the projected increase in global population till 2050 will be contributed by population momentum. The projection further suggests that till 2050, half of the population increase of the globe will be contributed by 8 countries, namely, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Egypt, Ethiopia, India, Nigeria, Pakistan, the Philippines and the United Republic of Tanzania. The world population prospects referred that India will surpass China and will be the most populous country of the world, which probably has become true. It is expected that countries of sub-Saharan Africa will continue growing through 2100, but population of Europe, North America, Latin America, Caribbean and major part of Asia will observe decline in population size much before 2100. The populations of Australia and New Zealand, Northern Africa and Western Asia, and Oceania, excluding Australia and New Zealand, are expected to experience slower, but still positive, growth through the end of the century. Australia and New Zealand is expected to have negative growth of population. This extreme regional variation will result into increased international migration, especially among the young population. Associated to this will be increase in aged population and increase in associated demand for care and security. Thus, global population challenge surely going to shift. 4.8 Let US sum up. The population growth in the world and in the continents are extremely fascinating, and several simultaneous socio-economic developments are reflected in this population growth history. The world took very long years to reach 1 billion mark. However, after that the population growth is much faster and population will continue to grow till 2100. The growth history was not same for all the continents, neither for the countries of that continents. Historically, share of the rich countries in the global population was higher, but over the years it is the poor countries that overtook the growth and their share in growth increased substantially. The growth is the lowest in Europe and highest in Africa. The density of population, however, reveals different picture where Bangladesh is the most densely populated country in the world. Though growth rate is low, yet Europe is quite dense continent. Currently, Africa is the youngest and Europe is the oldest, whereas rest are in between. Old age structure often is deficit in young labor force and thus encourages immigration to fulfill the gap. The immigrants are supplied by the high population growth countries. Africa as a continent is very young, whereas Europe is the oldest. Thus, Africa has population growth potential. The future projection shows Africa will continue to grow till 2100, whereas Asia, Latin America has contained the growth rate. However, population will continue to grow for sometimes even when low growth rate is achieved due to population momentum. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.